Hey, welcome back. I'm TJ. Today we're talking OMPHobby Products M1. We've done a lot of videos in the past on this. I haven't really done any setup videos for the M1 because quite literally it's the same setup for the M1 that it is for the M2. And we've done a few videos for the M2 for, well, OpenTX with a SFHSS receiver. We did it with OpenTX using the OMPHobby Products own protocol. We've done it for Spectrum. But this video is different, whereas it's for the M1 first off. But it's with Jonas from AccuRC, who has an incredible setup for his M1 specifically. And this video, we're actually sitting down with him and going start to finish with his setup. He's going to explain everything that it does, and it does some pretty incredible things. Most notably, what I'm excited for, since I am, well, new to collective pitch helicopters, I can do a little bit of stuff, but not much. And the rescue mode that he has set up is kind of next level. So it's not just as simple as, flip the stabilization on and it rights the helicopter. But, well, I'm not really going to talk too much about it because he talks about it later in the video. So this is a long video. There's a lot of information. He breaks everything down really, really well. In the description, there's links for all the videos that Jonas has done. There's links for setup videos I've done for the M2 in the past, but there's also timestamps for each individual section in his setup. So you can go straight to what you're interested in, or even better for us as well, watch the entire video to get a grasp on that. If you're not really interested in the ins and outs and how it actually works and how it functions, there's another video after this video for the actual setup. So we've got the model files available where you just download them. The setup's going to walk you through how to take that model file, put it on your transmitter, and getting it working with the M1, and kind of what the switches do, and just a brief overview. But if you're interested in why it does it, how it does it, and the actual inner workings of it, which I really suggest take a listen because it's a lot of information. I learned a lot from Jonas. Stick through this video, and I promise you won't regret it. So otherwise, without further ado, here is Jonas from AccuRC. I hope you enjoyed the video as much as I did making it with him. So thanks, guys. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button, push the notification bell, all that fun stuff. Let's get into it.
My name is Jonas Wackershauser. If you haven't noticed by now, I'm from Germany, but you should be able to tell from my accent. And some of the heli guys may know me. Some of the airplanes guys probably not. I'm mostly a heli guy, but I also started flying FPV recently, and I've been flying some foamy planks for quite a while. I do work with AccuRC precision simulation, as you may be able to tell. I also work with Nightwave lighting systems. I also contribute to the Oblivion open source heli project. And I am the one responsible for these beautiful rotor blades, RotorTech Ultimate, which I developed with Funky from Hong Kong.
Wow. So yeah, if you don't get the gist, Jonas is the man. I mean, I came across him when, well, it was through AccuRC there with the OMPHobby M2. They put it in the simulator, and I actually learned to fly some 3D through AccuRC, and we're a huge proponent for them here. Excited for I don't know if I can say.
We can talk about it because we actually used the original CAD files from the manufacturers to build our models. So what you're seeing here is what you're getting in the sim, pretty much one by one, because we use the files the manufacturer uses to build this helicopter. And yeah, the M1 is coming to AccuRC soon, and that is probably a matter for an entire different video because we're here today for the real M1.
Yeah, so that's the idea. Is I did set up videos for the M2 Explorer on Radiomaster and Spectrum, and it's just kind of like a basic. Here's what we're doing. Here's how you can fly it, and a really introductory level. But the idea is Jonas has an absolutely incredible. Well, actually a couple incredible flight videos out there with the M1 now. And he reached out and he's like, hey, what about going over and doing a setup video to where we literally give people his setup? And instead of him sending it to me and me trying to fumble through it and act like I know what I'm talking about, I wanted to really get Jonas in here and let him explain exactly what his setup is, all the ins and outs of it. And if you're not interested in learning how it works, you don't really have to know that. We're actually going to give you the file for the model setup. Later in the video, you can go in. We'll walk you through how to get that onto your transmitter, and then it's literally as simple as knowing what the switches do and then flying it. So with that setup out of the way, man, let's dive right into it.
So just generally, first off, let me say this is the freaking best micro heli I've ever flown in this size, and probably even a couple sizes up, including the M2, of course, because this stuff is freaking amazing. What they've done is incredible, and I cannot believe how well this flies. But it is not perfect.
Yeah.
I will say that right now. From the box, I saw some potential for improvement, and that is mostly what I want to go over, because as you can maybe see in the background, I'm a guy who flies all different sizes of helicopters.
Wow.
And one thing that is really important for me is consistency across helis. So I want my Logo 700 over there to fly the same as my Protus 380, to fly the same as my M1, Logo 200, whatever. Of course, that's not going to work out 100% because of different inertias, different disk loadings, but you can get them close. And that is really the goal I had for the M1. So why don't we get straight into the fiberless setup? Because that's the first thing I saw quite some potential in. One thing to notice, I got the OMP protocol version with an SFHSS satellite. This thing comes with a customizable fiberless system, which is set well enough from the factory to fly, but not perfectly. And this is what I want to go over. We're going to go through them from top to bottom. So I set them to rudder, speed 7, gyro 4. Speed 7 is essentially if you go on the radio and what's it want from me? Failsafe note said, why go away? Okay, so if you basically hold full rudder or full elevator or full aileron for that matter, the speed setting is how quickly the helicopter rotates in degrees per second. So rudder speed setting of 4 is gonna rotate slower than a speed setting of 7, and I found 7 to be just right for my flying style. That's really just personal preference where you set it, but for 3D flying, upping the speeds a bit is not a bad idea. I lowered the gyro gain to 4, and I actually lowered all the gyro gains on the helicopter, on elevator, aileron, and rudder, because the thing is, I think what they did at the factory is they took the same flight control software from the M2 and threw it on the M1. And since it's tuned for the M2, which is a bit larger, has a bit more inertia, a bit more docile rotor system, this rotor system is pretty aggressive. These settings do not fit so well, and with the stock gains, I found the helicopter to easily get into a bit of an oscillation. It would deflect, and then the fiberless would overcompensate, and it would compensate back and overcompensate again, and you get this little shake. So I lowered the rudder gyro setting to 4, elevator gyro to 3, and aileron gyro to 4. That brought me pretty good stability, while also being completely wobble-free and giving me a perfectly locked-in helicopter pretty much. Then we have the speed settings, as I said, rudder 7, elevator and aileron 6. That's pretty much in line with my larger helicopters. I always aim for 300 degrees per second. You may like it faster. I know my friend Keith likes 450 degrees per second. He cranks the rates all the way up, but that's not for me. I like my helis a bit tamer and more controllable. But the most interesting setting is the agile setting, and I lowered that on elevator and aileron. The difference between speed and agile, many people confuse these two settings, but there is a huge difference. So speed is the overall rotation rate of the helicopter. Agile is the fiberless feed forward. So if you give an input, for example, we jab the elevator, and this is why I love having the iPhone camera. You jab the elevator, and the fiberless deflects, and the helicopter starts to rotate. So you jab the elevator, it rotates, but the initial reaction of the helicopter and also how it stops directly depends on the agile setting, because that is how much of your stick input. So if you give it full stick, for example, it determines how much is fed directly to the swash. On agile 1, which is probably the lowest. You get the least feed forward directly from the stick to the swash. On 9, it's the most. And the goal of feed forward on a fiberless unit is to give it just the right amount, so the helicopter would reach the rotation rate that you request without the gyros having to do much. The agile setting was a bit too high with the stock 5 settings, so I lowered it down to 3 on both, and that actually gave me a really linear and predictable swash feel, and pretty much made it react perfectly for 3D flying without overcompensating any bounce backs, pretty precise stops, and that was pretty much what made the fiberless from good to great. Another thing I want to go into with the fiberless settings is when you go to the servo centering menu. Let me quickly... My swash was not perfectly leveled from the factory, and I think this is a very important point if you want to do precise and clean 3D, that you level your swash properly. And I see people starting with zip ties around the main shaft, 3D printed swash levelers, but I don't think that's really necessary, so let me show you how I did it. You take the blades, you fold them 90 degrees, you drop the helicopter on its side, check that they're perpendicular with the main shaft, let them fall to the front, check that they're perpendicular with the main shaft. If not, adjust your servos, and then also make sure these are in line. You see, you get this kind of scissor when you move the collective, and when your swash is centered, these are just perfectly in line. And that's it for swash centering.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a lot easier than I expected.
Easy as pie.
Now, speaking of which, if everybody that's watching this, if you haven't seen, there is a video for the M2 on how he's actually going through and doing all the adjustments on the flybarless unit. And if you want to see how to do that, you can click over to that video and actually see it's so simple. I don't think we really need to do it in this video here since we already have one of those. It's kind of the same thing between the M1 and M2. They just look a little bit different, but the buttons work identical.
This is also what I found. It's that simple.
Yeah.
And this already brings us to our next point, setting collective, because this is a tiny helicopter. And if you think about it, pitch gauges, they are huge. How are you going to fix a pitch gauge that's made for a 700 blade that's wider than the entire helicopter? How are you going to fix that to these tiny rotor blades? So you don't do that. You just fold your blades. You give it some collective. And then you get some kind of ruler or calipers or something and measure the distance between the blade tips. And the thing here is, this is just basic trigonometry. We know the length of the blades. We know the distance between the blade tips, and therefore we can derive the angle between the two blades and know our collective. So what I did was I set my distance between the blades to 58 millimeters, which corresponds to 13.5 degrees collective. And I'm going to send you a list that you can put on screen now with a couple of pitch angles, probably from 10 to 14 degrees. And it's as easy as that. You just measure the distance between the blade tips, set it accordingly, and have your collective set.
Now for yours, what do you have your pitch gauge set to?
So my pitch is at 13.5 degrees positive and negative. That is actually a lot for this little helicopter. So you need some collective management. I would recommend setting it to 12 to 12.5.
Okay.
But I just want this bit of extra punch, especially for low RPM. So that's 58 millimeters between the blade tips. Just set that symmetric in the pitch adjustment menu and you're good to go with your setup. The next thing to do is in the radio, how I set up my flight modes.
Right.
And I did a little measurement thingy for this, which you can also put on screen now, where I fixed the helicopter to the ground, put it on a power supply, and ran it up and down the throttle scale and recorded the RPMs. And what I found is that there's a linear relationship from 35 to 85% throttle between throttle and RPM, and that is your RPM. I can show this real quick. I just set 3 straight curves. That's 45%, that's 60%, and that's 72%. You have to convert that to a -100 +100 scale on the Radiomaster. That's pretty much how I set my RPMs. 4,500, 6,000, and 7,200. And these cover pretty much the entire flight envelope of this heli, from low RPM 3D, 6,000 RPM for regular 3D, and 7,200. It's frankly too much, but it's just so much fun. This little thing just turns into a complete rocket. That's my TX flight modes. Oh, collective pitch, in case anyone is wondering, is just a linear 0 to 100 curve, because some people reported that they felt the helicopters a bit weak around center on collective, but I never really felt that, so I never felt the need to do anything about that. Okay, so let's get to deadband mitigation, because even though this flybarless is absolutely fantastic, it has one little flaw that has always annoyed me on friends' M2s, and when I then decided to buy the M1, I knew I had to do something about this. This is actually also why I got the Radiomaster. I came from Spectrum, and Spectrum cannot do this. I'm really sorry for the Spectrum users at this point, because I know Jetty can do it, I know Futaba can do it, OpenTX can do it. Most of the most advanced radio systems can do it, but sadly, Spectrum cannot. And that is custom curves to mitigate a deadband, because this little helicopter, if you fly it stock and give an input that is approximately in the first 10% of the stick throw, so approximately around here.
Yeah.
The flabberless actually has a deadband that will not make the helicopter move at all. So you first have to get out of this range to get the helicopter to move. And I get why they did this. People have very different radios. There are cheap radios, there are expensive radios, and the cheap radios oftentimes have worse stick centering. They have a bit of, noise in the channels, and that just ensures that the helicopter stays put when you let go of the stick. But I found it to be annoying for 3D, honestly. So I wanted to get this out. And what I did in the TX16s was I defined just a little curve that you can see here that basically has ±8 as the coordinates for the output at ±1. And if I go into the actually input definition, I can show you this, because if I move the stick, you will see that down here is the stick position. So it's currently centered. And on this side is the output. So if I move the stick, you can see that as soon as I move the stick, the output jumps. So I move it to 1, it jumps to 8. I move it to -1, jumps to -8. And that pretty much skips this deadband. I found that it's approximately 8 to 10% of the entire stick throw. So I set mine to 8 so that when I move the stick, I get right to the edge of the deadband and the helicopter starts moving. And this really was the single most important thing on this helicopter that I found was necessary to make it really feel like I'm at home with this heli, really.
Well, it's like as soon as you make an input, it reacts, and you're not getting that mushy feel at the beginning. And dude, I'm most excited to put that on my transmitter than anything else we're talking about today.
Yep, and this also applies to the M2. So if you have an M2 with any radio that's not Spectrum, do this as well. Because 3D flying, yes, you give large inputs when you fly, but corrections mostly happen around stick center. And when you step out of for example, a rainbow and stop the heli dead and it's slightly tilted to the left or the right in a way you don't want, you do this little tiny input to correct it. And when you're used to that motion from a helicopter with a market leading flabberless, this can just get in the way. The helicopter can drift, it looks unclean, you're like, oh, why didn't it move? And that's just a little trick to kind of fix that issue.
So Jonas has done a lot of videos on the AccuRC channel that are kind of like, if you're a beginner, if you're somebody like me that, is trying to learn more about 3D, check out his channel. He hasn't done much here lately, pushing, poke, come on, do some more stuff. But, over the past couple of years, I think it was, man, you really put out some amazing content, and there's not really a lot of stuff out there for helicopters in general. So it's, what you've done with that channel, I mean, at least for me, has been huge, because you make me look like I know what I'm doing sometimes.
Yeah, I saw your corkscrews. They actually look good.
We're getting there.
So another thing I want to talk about is the rescue setup, because what if you're learning 3D and you kind of want to try new stuff without the risk of wrecking your helicopter? Because, I've never been a huge fan of rescue, and I always tell people to not use rescue if they can get away with it at all. So like go higher, learn to save the heli yourself. But sometimes you're just in a situation where you don't know what to do and rather have the heli save itself than it's slamming into the ground. And what like the larger flybarless units do is they will incorporate collective into this equation and make the helicopter climb after it's leveled. Now M1 and M2, they have self-leveling, but not to that extent. The self-leveling on the M1 and M2 is more like for beginners, so they can fly the helicopter and just let go of the sticks and it will level again. But we can abuse this to make a rescue mode. And what I've done here is I actually resoldered my switches. So this is now my momentary switch and this is my motor switch because I've been a Spectrum guy forever and I just went with that layout. So that switch on a stock TX16s will be here.
Okay.
And what I've done is I've come up with a setup. It's pretty simple, but very effective that will level the helicopter and then make it rise. Now, the thing is, if you just pull self-leveling in 3D and you're in a situation where you don't know how to control the helicopter and you still have negative in, the helicopter will level and, well, you're then upright with negative and it will slam into the ground and crash and break. So what I've done is I've created two new curves. One that is flat collective, so 0 degrees, and one that is positive 70%. I don't know what that is in degrees, but it's enough to make the heli rise. And when I pull rescue, I'm going to show this right here. So I pull rescue. Did you see what happened? The helicopter first goes to 0 collective while it's self-leveling, and then feeds in positive collective when it's level, 0.3 seconds later. So let's assume I'm at full negative. I am in this situation. I pull rescue, it levels, flies up. And this 0.3 second delay between the two collective inputs is what makes this work, because I found that at 3D RPMs, even if you're fully hovering inverted and pull the self-leveling, the helicopter will be upright no later than 0.3 seconds.
Now, so, sorry, when we, so let's say that I'm inverted and I go, my brain just poops all over itself and I have no idea what I'm doing and I pull that switch. Now I just hold that switch and the helicopter does the neutral collective, it flips itself over and then it automatically puts in the positive. So as long as I hold that switch, that positive collective is going to be there, right? And then I let it go, exactly. And then the stick input takes back over. So it's overriding whatever your stick input's doing as long as you're holding that switch.
Exactly. So it drops you off all collective control. So it will go to 0 collective no matter where you are. And while it's at 0 collective, it will level. I found this to work. It's like I've been hovering inverted off the ground 50 centimeters away from the ground, pulled the switch. The heli dropped a tiny little bit, flipped over, rose away. It's not been an issue as long as I've not been flying at the ground very quickly at very low altitudes.
Right.
So this can really be a lifesaver.
I think that's kind of the point I just want to make for the people watching it is it's not a flip it and forget it. Like you don't just tap it and expect the helicopter to save itself. It's like you got to hold it for the rescue portion, you know. So it's not just tap it and then expect the helicopter to right itself. It's like if you need to rescue, get on that switch and hold it until the helicopter levels itself out. Correct whatever kind of collective you input you're giving it on your stick, and then let go of the switch. Does that sound pretty close?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
That is exactly how it works. I could have made it so that you trigger it once and it does the entire rescue sequence, but then you would not have control over when it gives it back to you. So
I wouldn't like that.
When you have the switch pulled actively, the helicopter will rise until you're ready to let go of the switch. So you let go and get your control back. If I made it like 1.5 seconds of climb time, you were still at full negative, it would give you back that full negative and slam it down.
Yeah, beginners or newer people, they in that situation, they're flustered. You know, at that point, if they're crashing and they're pulling that switch, their brain's already not keeping up with what's happening. So to give them the control to say, okay, I'm going to hold it, breathe, now I'm ready to take back control, that's huge. Yeah.
But it works from pretty much everything. If you put it inverted, make it pirouette, it will do an automatic piro flip. for you if you pull the rescue switch and then rise up. So if you want to flex to your friends, just put it inverted pirouette, pull rescue, it'll piro flip and rise up.
That's awesome.
Just make sure you're not too low, because it's not a guaranteed save. For that, it would need some logic right inside the fiberless unit, which it does not have, but we're making the best from it. And one last thing I did was a kind of a smart timer setup, because I fly by timer because I don't want to wreck my batteries, and I have a nice little 3-minute timer set in my TX16s, and I'm actually gonna unplug the helicopter so it doesn't spool up on my bench when I demonstrate this. And what I've done is I have a safety switch, which I would recommend to everyone who can afford assigning an extra switch, and my whole switch. It's just an extra precaution, so because if you're bumping that whole switch, that heli is gonna spool up in your hand, it's gonna spool up wherever you put it. It's not gonna pretty, so we have a safety switch. So what I did was I assigned the timer to run only when the, how can I show this? Probably like this. When the safety switch is up and the motor switch is on run, you can see it's counting down my 3 minutes. When I want to land to adjust something or for other reasons, I pull hold, it stops the timer. But you know what always annoys me with these helicopters? You have to reset the timer yourself if you swap batteries, but not switch off the radio.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I just did a little thing where if I pull both throttle hold, motor is off, and the safety switch, it just resets the timer. That also works the other way around. Timer is running, pull safety switch, timer stops, put safety switch back up, timer runs, pull auto rotation or throttle hold, it resets. And that way you can easily reset the timer between flights without having it reset every time you switch off the motor. That's mostly it for my setup on this little guy. Otherwise, it's a fantastic little micro heli, which I have no complaints about. It's the most powerful, most well-behaved, most clean flying micro heli I've ever had, and I absolutely love it. And Jesus Christ, how have they done this?
One thing I do want to ask is, so we get a lot of, I don't like saying new people flying these things, but I mean, it really is. We have a lot of beginners that are jumping in with the M1 and M2. Now, if they are using this setup, there's not really a normal mode that's set up, kind of like what it is with the OMP. Now, they could technically put the stabilization on a toggle switch on and off, and then use that as kind of like a normal mode if they wanted to. Let me back up a little bit. Instead of doing that, okay, buy AccuRC, learn how to hover and everything without stabilization, and then you combine it. Don't do stabilization. If you can do it without it, jump right in. And that's the biggest benefit that I think with simulators is the fact that, man, you can fly the M2 in it right now. Turn stabilization off, crash it a million times until you learn how to hover it without that. And then you ease into the 3D stuff. You know, yeah, you can have full collective without ever needing to go below zero into negative, and learn to hover and learn to control that, and then actually get the muscle memory to where it's like you don't want to slam that stick down to land it. Whereas if you're using what they call normal mode on the OMP protocol, you're getting into the habit to lower your stick all the way to zero to land the helicopter. If you're in collective and you do that, now you're going to be replacing parts because you just drilled it into the ground. So I'm going to back up and say, don't put stabilization on a switch. If you're watching this video and you're going to use Jonas's setup, use his setup, but also get, and this is a plug for AccuRC, buy AccuRC. I can't say enough good things about it. And learn how to fly the dang helicopter without stabilization. And it's going to speed up your learning process so much. You're probably going to get frustrated at the beginning, but it's worth it. Like, it flat out is worth learning how to do it correctly from the beginning.
That's pretty much all I would have said as well. Buy AccuRC. It's pretty much the best training companion you can have. Have the real helicopter, which is inexpensive to fly and to crash. Get the sim to practice on so you don't have to crash in the first place. Put a proper setup on with the rescue switch, with a proper deadband mitigation so you have direct and precise control. And I mean, my setup is pretty 3D geared, so you can lower the speeds in the flybar list to 4 or 3 for the start, but don't fly it in self-leveling.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing with this video is, you know, trying to give people a solid start with the M1 helicopter. And, you know, Jonas, he's already shown us in his videos that if you have the skill using this setup, you're going to get incredible results with it. So it's a really good way to ease into the hobby with kind of, you know, it's one of those, you throw somebody into the deep end, but they have a floaty on. so you're not going to drown, but you're going to learn a little bit faster than if you're trying to ease into it with the stabilization, and then you have to unlearn some of the stuff you learned with stabilization while you still retain some of it. It makes it harder in the long run, really. Okay, so all of that literally was just an explanation from the man himself on why he did all the setup, the way he did it, and to give you kind of the reason behind the setup.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to present the setup to the world, because I think it's almost the ultimate 3D setup. Of course, personal preference comes into play, but I think I've got a pretty good basis. Thanks for having me, and have fun explaining my setup to the people.
Yeah, so guys, again, AccuRC, buy it if you don't have it. If you're any kind of interested in 3D helicopters or learning to get better with helicopters, check out AccuRC, links in the description. Again, his videos on showing you how to do some of the tricks, walking you through things like that, links in the description for that. It is a huge major tool. I've learned so much from this guy that it really is. He's great at what he does. So check out those links. Also, the links for the flying videos that Jonas has done with the M1 will be down there as well. And we'll let him go, and we'll jump into the actual setup video. So Jonas, again, man, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it. This video is going to be long, but I love it.